Hi, my name is Cristiana, and I'll be presenting today on behalf of my team on gendered home food environments and how they are central to children's dietary diversity in rural Tanzania. So we know that nutritional status and diets of young children are not adequate in Tanzania, as we can see in this map here. This is a map of hidden hunger among preschool children in different countries based on stunting, anemia due to iron deficiency, and vitamin A deficiency. And you can see here highlighted on the map is the country of Tanzania in the severe category for hidden hunger among preschool children. When you look specifically at dietary diversity, which can be a driver of inadequate nutritional status, only about a fourth of children 6 to 23 months achieved minimum dietary diversity. So what are drivers of children's diets in this context? Taking a food environment framework approach, as we have seen in other talks here today, we can see here in the INFORMAS framework that caregivers here in this orange box of this figure are intermediaries between other components of the food environment and children's diets. So you see the personal and external food environments, as well as the food supply chain, can impact children's diets, but not directly. They need to go through caregivers and the home environment, those really responsible for feeding children. So for the purposes of my talk today and this research, this is what I am characterizing as the home food environment, is this intersection of the personal food environment, so personal environment of caregivers, for example, and others in the household, as well as their behaviors and how those influence children's diets. So what influenced children's diets at different ages, especially looking at young children, because they change rapidly? Just taking a quick glance here, you can see in this purple part of the graph, you see that up to 6 months, children are supposed to be exclusively breastfed, and then they gradually start consuming more and more complementary foods until that becomes the entirety of their diet and they stop breastfeeding. So this just highlights how children's diets change rapidly, and older children consume more complementary foods, or at least that's the recommendation. But breastfeeding is really important among these younger age groups. And young children have less autonomy of their food choices, just highlighting again the importance of caregivers. So what do we already know about how the home environment shapes children's diets? And let's focus on dietary diversity. Some challenges within the home environment include poverty, so lack of money can be a challenge to provide adequate diverse diets with different food groups. Lack of knowledge of certain food groups can also be a challenge to adequate complementary feeding. And then women's lack of decision-making power has also been noted as a challenge. For example, sometimes men may be deciding on the expenditures, but maybe women are the ones deciding what to feed children. So there can be challenges there if there's not communication between partners. So just to highlight 2 research gaps before we get into the methods and results here real quickly, we see a lack of studies engaging fathers. Really, studies have focused largely on mothers as caregivers. But we know that the knowledge and roles of other caregivers is important. So fathers may provide financial support, and their knowledge has also been associated with children's dietary diversity. Second, we see inconclusive findings between the relationship of intra-household dynamics included in this measures of women's empowerment and child feeding practices. I'll highlight 2 reviews here. In a review from 2015 by Carlson et al., of positive associations in general were observed between measures of maternal autonomy and better child nutritional status. However, findings were inconsistent. There were, this was not a clear picture. Some negative associations, some insignificant results, and they highlighted regional differences and a lack of studies investigating outcomes based on different age groups separately. At that time, they only noted one study investigating these outcomes among older children separately. And then there's also a lack of indicators of time resource allocation and men's engagement in child nutrition. Both of these reviews highlighted that anthropometric measures of child nutritional status are the main outcomes investigated, and very few studies use child feeding practices as an outcome. So that's where we'll be focusing today, is looking at these child feeding practices as an outcome. So to address these gaps, I'm using cross-sectional baseline data from a randomized controlled trial in rural Tanzania to investigate the associations between both mothers and fathers, nutrition knowledge, personal resources, and how they relate to infant and young child feeding practices at different ages. And then also to investigate the relationship between couples' communication and decision-making over household resources and children's IYCF practices at different ages. So I hypothesize that both parents' nutrition knowledge and personal resources will be important for child feeding practices, and that better couples' communication will also be important for that. And I look at dietary diversity among children 6 to 23, and then also the net subgroup of 9 to 23 months. As mentioned before, this is from a randomized control trial in rural Tanzania, and it's called Effects, Engaging Fathers for Effective Child Nutrition and Development. And it was basically if there was a young child under 18 months and both parents were present in the home for most of the year. So for the analysis, this just highlights how this was in the northern part of Tanzania, here near Lake Victoria and in the Mara region, and the outcome of dietary diversity. And there were 960 households.
Please,
baseline
you have to
characteristics.
Up a little bit because you have about 2 minutes more.
Sounds good. So this just highlights about 30% of children achieved minimum dietary diversity. So here, to wrap up with the results, we see that knowledge of mothers was higher than knowledge of fathers for food groups good for child growth and development, with 4 versus 3 out of 8 food groups. And you can see this exemplified here in the graph. The mother in light blue, father in the medium blue, and then agreement between both parents in the darker blue. And older children consumed 5 food groups compared to younger children that only consumed 2. So to highlight here, we see that children 6 to 23, dietary diversity among children 6 to 23 months was associated with various factors within the home food environment. So mother's knowledge of foods good for child growth and development, her report of high social support, and her report of different measures of relating to couples' relationship dynamics were associated with higher dietary diversity among children. And these results were similar among older children, except here father's knowledge became almost significant marginally, and household savings became significant as well. And these are, just as a reminder, these are children who are consuming more complementary foods than breast milk. So here, when both the mom and the dad reported that the household has savings, children consumed almost half a food group more, just highlighting the importance of couples communicating about these household resources and having savings. And and then you see food insecurity also became a significant barrier. So to conclude, some key findings are that mother's nutrition knowledge, social support, and her report that the household has savings, as well as parents' joint report of that, were associated with improved child diets. And also gender equity, especially around communication and household decision-making, had positive associations with child dietary diversity. Therefore, gender dynamics and equity within the household are key components of children's home food environment and must be considered to enable optimal diets for young children. Thank you. And yeah, I would love to hear any questions that you have now.